coming out live. It should be good today.
Done okay to
It's on stop.
welcome everybody. Welcome to this council meeting on the 24th of August 2022. Welcome to everybody in the chamber. Welcome to staff. Anyone else that's with us on Zoom, we've got councillors Michael Deaker, Michael Laws, Gary Kelleher, Carmen Hope, and also we have staff Nick Donnelly and Gavin Palmer, and we've also got Shannon from MFE with us as well. So nice to have you all here. Moving to the agenda. Apologies, I don't believe there's any full apologies, but
Alexa, we haven't received an apology. It's just going to come in now.
It's coming in now. So this is an apology from Hillary for early departure, 3 o'clock. So we note that. We'll move straight to the public forum. I understand that we've got Alan Saville and Peter Dowden from. Okay, I understand that we've got Alan Saville and Peter Dowden from the Tramways Union. I believe Alan's the president and Peter is the vice president. Can you hear me, Alan and Peter?
Soon, got it.
Yep. Welcome, Alan.
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, councillors.
Hey, nice to have you with us. I understand Peter is also on Zoom. Peter Dowden.
Yes, Peter is here beside me.
Oh, excellent.
Just in case the Zoom breaks down.
Yeah, I'm not exactly technically competent in all areas, Mr. Chair, so Peter is here to make sure that things go smoothly.
I know how that feels. That's all good. I'm in the same boat.
Could we turn one of the sounds off? Because I think we're getting a bit. They've got the Tramway Union and I think one's
All good. We'll see how we go and we can tweak it as we go along. So Alan and Peter, you're here to talk about the funding of wages for bus drivers. Obviously, we've got the item on the agenda with regards to the living wage. And so we're in your hands. You've got 5 minutes. So we're here to listen. So we're all yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Afternoon, councillors. I'm Alan Saville, President of the Dunedin Tramways Union, representing the Dunedin drivers. Here we are again. Here we are again, pleading for a little dignity. But no, we're no longer going to do that. Rather, I'd like to take this opportunity to clarify the issues resulting in the reduced bus timetable. On Sunday night, the government announced changes to the immigration policy, allowing skilled workers into the country to fill targeted industry shortfalls. Most commentators expected bus drivers to be on that list. They were not. So let's dispel the myth that there is a shortage of bus drivers. There is not. And please don't let anyone tell you there is a shortage. The immigration minister doesn't believe it, and neither do we. Waka Kotahi have provided numbers of individuals who currently hold both a Class 2, that's the heavy trade, and a P endorsement. So that's people with the licenses to drive a bus. Numbers at the end of as the 31st of July last month, so that's really current, it's only 25 days ago, show that nationally there were over 29,000, and in Otago alone there was 2,092 individuals that hold those licenses. And Mr. Chair, can I take this opportunity to table that document? We have the document here. All right. There is not a shortage of bus drivers. These licenses are expensive, they're time consuming, and they are not a requirement for any recreational activity. The only reason people get these licenses is for commercial use or employment. At the moment, these license holders are choosing not to work in the industry because pay and conditions are so poor. There have been a number of reasons why we have got to this state. The passenger transport operating model, COVID, school bus contracts. But the sole reason we are on a reduced bus timetable is that the pay is too low to attract and retain drivers. We're not going to be saved by a swag of cheap migrant drivers. Auckland has recently settled for hire. Wellington have too. So the 65-cent living wage increment may not be enough to recruit drivers, but it may go some way to stemming the outflow. And I think that's where our focus has to be at the moment. It's a start. It's a start. So, Mr. Chair, councillors, hopefully I've clarified the reason Dunedin is not getting the bus service they need and deserve. There is no shortage of qualified drivers, but the reason they are not driving is not COVID, it's not the flu, it is pay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors.
Thank you very much. Peter, you don't want to make any comment?
Oh, no, I think no, it's all with Alan. That's cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Alan's in charge.
Okay, happy to take some questions.
Certainly.
Yep. So you've summed it up by saying it's not about shortage of bus drivers, it's about the level of pay, simply put.
It is, Mr. Chair. The document from Wakakatahi is quite clearly shows that there is no shortage of individuals within this region who have the licenses to drive a bus, but they are choosing not to drive a bus because of the paying conditions.
Thank you. I'll go to Michael Laws, then Michael Deaker, then Kate Wilson. We can't hear you, Michael. You're on mute.
Sorry, my apologies. First of all, can I say to our presenter, there is not a word that you said that isn't the complete truth. And good on you for reminding us. The question is this. In Queenstown, over 2 years ago now, this council voted to increase bus driver wages in our area to the living wage. And we made that decision and put it into our long-term plan. Can I ask you how long it took from that decision being made, which I think was in May 2020, until it was actually implemented and those dollars were in the pockets of your bus drivers?
Yeah, it was just over 15 months. Yeah, it
Thank
went
you.
from June 1 year to September the following.
And were you back paid any of that?
Yeah, all of it. We got
Oh,
all of it back. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
and we did.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael Deaker.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alan and Peter. A very clear submission. Can you put some numbers around it for us, please? You say there's an ample supply sitting out there who would be working if the pay and conditions were better. In Dunedin and in Queenstown, roughly how many people are there who would be able to drive a bus for Ritchie's and Go Bus if they got that money?
The figures we got from Wakakatahi, and it was the way in that we asked for those figures, was that we only wanted current ones. So we didn't want people who had, in the old days, the HT, we call an HT from 20 years ago, who still have it on their license.
Sure.
We wanted people who were still actively current at the moment. The maximum time you can get a P endorsement for is 5 years, but a lot of drivers only get it for 1 year. So the maximum time that these people have had that current endorsement is 5 years ago, and it's still current now. So we are talking exceptionally current figures. And that was as at the 31st of July last month. That's only 25 days ago. So we're not talking outdated figures, councillor. We're talking as at now. These are people that 2092 are capable of jumping into a bus and driving now. Yep.
Thank you.
Kate, then Gretchen, then Brian,
And Hillary.
and Hillary.
Thank you, kia ora, Ellen and Peter. Just want to check on, it's not just pay, it's conditions as well. So could I just have an idea of what commercial some people are working in a different commercial bus service, and there's a lot of tourists doing tourism businesses with bus services. What is their going rate and the conditions that make those jobs attractive compared to driving the public transport system?
These people are mainly not driving passenger transport vehicles, they're driving trucks, or they are serving as baristas in restaurants and cafes.
Yeah,
There are very few jobs that pay less.
No, I get that. Sorry, but there are some people that are driving buses that aren't public transport buses for commercial tourism businesses. Maybe the AG Hackett's and the. Do you know
Yes.
what those? And so I want to compare. They are driving. What are their pay rates? Do you know, or maybe you don't? And what are their conditions compared to split shifts and things? What is worse, the pay rate or the split shifts?
Oh, yeah, that's a bit of both. To start off with, you have to put food on the table for your family. So there's got to be pay there to start off with.
Yeah.
And then the split shifts and things come into it. When we're talking about conditions, there's things like split shifts. It's also things like just wearing a mask. Now, we're now wearing a mask for 10, 12 hours a day. The public, their tolerance levels have certainly dropped. We're getting a lot more aggression towards drivers and that sort of thing. To getting back to your first question on what private or commercial operators are paying, it varies. It varies hugely from operator to operator. Most of those operators are not full-time employees.
Yep.
There's a lot of just part-time retirees who pick up the little bit for, like AJ Hackett. It'll be very much on they'll ring you up and you come in and work. So it's not the same as a contract that we're turning up day in, day out. So I'm sorry, I can't answer. I really can't answer that question for you.
And we'll wrap it up after Gretchen, Brian, and Hillary.
Thank you. Just quickly, do you know how many of that 2092 are actually currently working in the public bus service?
About 300.
Okay.
About 300, but a lot of those are not full-time. They're like me. We were sort of semi-retired, or we do it because we love doing it. We're not doing it for the money, so we may not be full-time. But yeah, somewhere around 300.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you. I know that the forestry industry had a serious shortage of truck drivers. Have some of these people with this particular license gone to the forestry industry and so forth? You know, are more with its, I assume, more attractive for remuneration, yeah?
Yes, certainly. Certainly. We have a number of drivers who have gone not only to forestry, but the general trucking industry. Yeah, especially the younger guys.
And
the younger guys that are looking who need the money. They need the mortgage money. They need the family money.
And how much do they get paid?
They're on $27, $28, $30 an hour, depending on the type of truck that they're driving.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary.
Just again, another quick one. Do we know, and it might be anecdotally, the part of that group who have increased the shortage we've got because they've got older? Or to put it another way, have we got an aging bus driver force so as that people who have a choice and might be like you choosing partly because they love it, but might just not love it anymore now, and you know, with better money they'd be more attracted, but you know, is it young people leaving?
No, it's
older people leaving to be.
It's exactly the opposite. the younger people are leaving and greater demands are being placed on the older ones to work. So we have a number of over 70s who are working too long. In my opinion, they're working too many hours, but the pressure has been put on them to work. So the age of the workforce has increased, and the less money we're getting, the more it becomes a job for the older people who can afford to do it, because they're also being supplemented with government super.
So it's community service.
It is very much so. And a lot of the work that we've been doing, me included, has been because we don't want to let our passengers down. We want to make sure there's a bus on the route. So there's these 70-year-olds turn up for work. Yep.
Thank you. Gavin, did you want to respond to that? I just see that your hand is up on our screen here in the chamber.
Yeah, it's the cursor.
It's dies.
Yeah.
There we go.
Just forget what I said, Gavin.
Sorry.
Even though the final whistle's gone, there is one last question, Alan.
Yeah, Alan, Kevin Malcolm here. Alan, your direct employers, the bus companies, what work is the union doing to put pressure on the companies to increase the wage that you're getting and also to improve those conditions?
We are restricted to an extent by our collective agreements that we have. You only have certain time periods that you are allowed to negotiate for wages, and we have one coming up early next year. Unfortunately, a lot of our members, we're doing it because we actually love the job, and we don't want to strike. But it's starting to get, I'm not threatening to strike, sorry, I'll rephrase that. But we are getting to a point where we're just, our tolerance levels are starting to stretch a little bit. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, no, I spoke, look, at the end of the day, you direct the person that pays you. Well, we can probably do some things in pressure, but the person that pays you is really the person you're working for. So I would assume that we'll be having something pretty powerful, because the companies that are making profit out of your work are actually probably struggling at the moment because they can't supply the services. So you've probably got quite a good tool there, and I'd hope that the right pressure was being put on them.
Okay. We think the councils actually have probably more ability to put pressure on the companies by fining them if the routes aren't completed and that sort of thing. I don't know, maybe it's the state of the unions that we're a small divided group down here. But we've just discussed this morning with Peter that the company always never runs out of diesel. They never run out of other product to run the service. The price of diesel has gone up hugely in the last 12 months, but we never run out of diesel. So how come we're running out of bus drivers? We just don't seem to have the power, the individual power to do it.
Thank you very much, Alan and Peter. Thank you for giving us an insight into the challenges that we face as a city, and also you are both close to the action in terms of your representation through the Tramways Union. So we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Moving on to item 3, confirmation of the agenda. I'm not aware of any. I'm not aware of any additions as far as I'm concerned. So just take it that we confirm the agenda as circulated. Don't need a motion. We just agreed. Yep. Conflict of interest, item 4. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Just a reminder, anyone want to raise any anything at this point? If not, moving on to item 5, confirmation of the minutes. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the 29th of June 2022 council meeting are a true and
I'll second
accurate record. Second by Hilary. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Can everyone hear me on Zoom? Thank you. Moving on to item 6. This is the open action from resolutions of council. As the one that is listed has been completed, so doesn't need any discussion. So moving on to item 7, and this is 7.1. This is the 6-monthly report to the minister. This is a report provided for council to adopt the 6th progress report to the Minister for the Environment in accordance with section 27 of the Resource Management Act 1991 in relation to the recommendations made under section 24A of the Resource Management Act 1991. This report is the final report of the current triennium. Welcome to Anita. And this is all about the Otago Regional Council developing a fit for purpose planning framework to manage Otago's natural resources. So nice to have you with us, Anita. We've got 3 recommendations there. The report's signed off by our interim CE. Anita, is there anything you want to highlight through the document? Obviously, you've made some comment in the report around capability and capacity in a number of spaces, and you've talked obviously about the High Court decision in regards to the regional policy statement, but is there anything else you would like to mention, or?
Just through the chair, after discussion with yourself,
Yes.
we are proposing to add 1 paragraph into the, I think it's called land management in the actual report, which just talks about the work that the environmental implementation team are doing for the Jobs for Nature and Eco Fund. So just to add that in as well. So I've provided those words to Andrew, and we'll add those into the report before it goes out to the minister.
And the background of that conversation was just reflecting on the environmental implementation projects that we've been updated from time to time about what's happening throughout Otago. 25 plus projects, quantum over a period of years, 50 odd mil. I just thought that was a useful comment to have in there, just to give the minister a bit of background on all the good work that's happening actually out in the field as well in that sort of non-regulatory space. Questions for Anita? Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, on page 17, what identifies the paragraph talks about pressures for recruiting in the labour market, pressures on consultants to assist, and it's also reflected on pages 22, 23, 24, 25 and 31. What I'm really I'll just take a wee step back. We were given at Stratton planning a very sound plan going forward, and really appreciate that, but it's a clear and concise way going forward, and that we are confident that you've mapped that out really, really well. I just want to reflect again on what I said at that meeting, is that how is this currently being reflected, A, in our budgets, where if we're hiring more consultants, and B, in the availability of consultants and the availability of staff and the staff pressures, because we've got a very tight program, and I'm just mindful under our health and safety that our staff pressures are not being overstretched.
Yeah, sure. So through the chair, there's a couple of things. So in terms of consultant support, because we're at the front of the pack, we've actually got the consultants first, as it were. So that's a good thing. We've got consultant support available across work programs in the policy and science space. So that's really useful. In terms of budgets, there is budget provided for consultants across the work programs. And some of the spend on consultants is offset by vacancies. So it's not a full cost. There's likely to be a shortfall. And so we know, for example, the RPS work program, there will be a difference in the cost from what we pay the staff now that the staff have all gone, and consultants. And so that's a conversation that we've had at ELT, and we'll just continue to manage that as we go and highlight to council where we need to. Staff wellbeing is really important to me, and I have seen what a really intensive consultation program does to people in previous roles. So it's really important that we make sure we've got the right support around people, because there will be we'll be consulting until December, and we'll be consulting again in February. So there's not a lot of a gap in there. Very mindful of that.
Thank you. Actually, just before we go to Brian, I should ask, because you've actually signed the report off. And was there anything you wanted to add, just in any general comments in any way, shape, or form?
Not really, not in terms of the report back to the minister. I think Anita's team have put most of that together and have done a very good job. Anita, I was probably going to ask you a question though, and that is, we're relying more on consultants in the RPS space, for instance, and maybe one or two other areas whereas Kevin's just mentioned, we're under too much pressure. But we are still trying to fill some of those vacancies at the same time, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. There's an ongoing recruitment happening. That's right.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, no, thank you. And there's a follow-on question from that. And this report does talk about there's 2 vacancies in the science team continue to be hard to fill in the competitive market. But just as a matter of interest, like from a governance perspective, do we know roughly how many staff we're currently short?
I can tell you that we're short about 9 people in the policy team, but I don't know across the organisation. Science and environmental monitoring are pretty good, but I'd have to look at other people to find out more broadly than that.
Those, like, this is very detailed, but from a governance perspective, just to sort of get when how are we sort of tracking from it would be interesting to find that out. Just.
Look, I think what we just said about bus drivers is probably true for just about every part of the workforce at the moment. It's a very tight workforce, and that means that we are challenged with recruiting staff. Amanda can probably touch on this, but we're also I commented on this, I think, a bit later on in my chief executive's report, but we're also building the organisation. So we're growing the organisation to a greater number of FTEs so we can be fit for purpose. At the same time, we've also got quite a sizable staff turnover. So, those 2 challenges mean that in the end, we spend more time recruiting staff than we'd prefer to be spending on recruitment. And that means we have to think about retention and how we can keep our staff. It saves a lot of effort and energy, and new staff take time to get up to speed. So, these are things that we are talking and thinking about, aren't they, Amanda? And you've probably got a bit of an idea as to what the vacancies are across the entire organisation.
No, not off the top of my head, but what I would add is that for audit and risk, have asked for visibility over some of these numbers, and so we're preparing some dashboard reporting, some new training for audit and risk, which will cover things like vacancies, turnover rates, recruitment challenges. So we recognise the interest from the government.
That would be appreciated. I mean, in there, I think we said we had a 15% staff loss, but it would be nice to know what our shortfall was for the 330 or whatever, right?
Yeah. Well, as the manager said, we'll get that data to you. But look, it's something we're focused on as an ELT by definition, because obviously you're concerned if we've got vacancies and we're having to employ consultants to fill up some of those gaps. But we're equally concerned as a management team, and I'm concerned as the employer, that we're able to retain staff, good staff, and recruit good staff actually.
Thank you. Follow-up question.
It's a clarification. The clause that Councillor Scott's talked about is actually from the March 2022 update. It's not the current situation. And it makes me wonder whether we're actually messaging this particularly well, because this is not a new format. Whether this reads, because the heading, what we revised in March 2022, is only on one of the columns. Cool. It's not on every page. So we've actually got one more since then. If you read the next column along, that's how it reads. I'm not quite sure that it.
Bad example, good question though. Yeah.
But it doesn't take away from the issue.
It's still relevant. It's just different.
Well, no, but it is important that we actually say that the staff have done a great job getting a science manager in this space. And if we don't think we've got one, then we've got a problem, which is what you're saying.
Thank you. Michael Laws.
Sorry, actually just on that, is one of the problems that it's probably easier if you're an employee to be a consultant than it is to be an employee of a regional council, because I can't imagine it's unique to us. So in other words, are we likely to face this situation going forward for a bit longer yet, just because it's probably more attractive being a consultant with a nice hourly rate than it is being an employee? Have I got that right or wrong?
So through the chair, there's a couple of things, and I've been a consultant twice and I've worked for 4 or 5 local authorities. It is a bit of a cycle. So consultants tend to poach from regional councils. They identify, or from councils, they identify good staff, create a vacancy, create a shortfall, and then you have to go back. So there is an absolute cycle. There are absolutely really good benefits for working for local government directly, not as a consultant, and that's why you have such a good workforce. So it just depends on place and time, but there is a bit of a cycle there where we steal and poach and from each other. I noticed MFE's on board. MFE created some of the shortfall because they recruited significantly in the last wee while, and so that certainly put pressure on across the board. But I have to say, Councillor Laws, for about 10 years there's been a shortage of staff for councils. It's not a new problem. We just don't seem to be that good at finding a solution for it.
And answering a little bit more of your question, Michael, yes, I had a regional chief executive sector meeting last Thursday, and actually our turnover is very similar to the whole sector. So that 15 to 18% staff turnover that we've had in the last 12 months, pretty much across the board. So this is a challenging space. Nita's right. There are certain areas where there are shortages nationally, and then if the private sector employs those people, then we have an even greater shortage. So we end up having to re-employ those people as consultants, and it's expensive. But yeah, so look, the tight labour market's part of the problem here.
Thank you very much.
We do still get really good people applying for our jobs. We've just had a really qualified scientist start on Monday, a great addition to the team. So we are still getting people in the door. Sometimes though you might get one when you want 2 or 3, and that's the challenge.
Thank you. No other queries, questions? Someone like to move the 3 recommendations on the
Happy to.
Happy to.
Seconded by Carmen. Any discussion? That's noting the report, approving the 6th report, and noting the next report will be in the new Trinium, dependent on the timing of that will be dependent on the new council meeting schedule. So I'll put all those 3 together. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Anita.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear you call about the open actions. There's several things there that I was going to get. Can we do that at the end? Or was I just really slow? You went through the actions register.
Oh, sorry, I was actually looking. I was actually looking for the non-public one when I said there was only one item.
Yeah.
Let's.
Why don't we do it at the end if you want? Because it's stuff.
No, do it now, and then we can go back to the agenda. So you had some. So the ones in green have been completed, and there are 4 in progress.
So the end date for the once I was looking at start at the bottom, this is easier. The end date one for the report on the alternative catchment-based rating system says 30th of June. I just want to make sure that that won't be the 30th of June, because we couldn't implement it then. That will be something that we get in the April at latest, probably March, to consult on, if that's the case.
Clarify that. Get that question clarified. Yep.
Yeah, and there was I was hoping we might hear what the one on the walkways, and I couldn't quite understand the comment there that we'd stopped, and the policy is in preparation. The timeframe is unable to be met due to the resolution made by Finance Committee, and what that means.
Okay, we can see clarification on that. Just have that circulated, Kate.
Yeah, fine.
Circulated to everyone. Danella, how are you?
Jelena.
Delina, sorry. Sorry, Delina. So we're on 7.2. Welcome, Delina. Plan change 8, urban discharges finally crossed the line. It's just that standard resolutions to essentially make these provisions operative. Anything you want to add, Delina?
Basically, this was just the last report in a series of reports that, with the decision of the court on the urban provisions, council is now finally able to make Plan Change 8 fully operative. And you won't have to see my face at the table again. Well, in this context, anyway.
I'm sure there'll be other
Yeah.
either variations or whatever else will pop up in the future. But thank you for that.
Can I just add that this,
Anita?
when ORC, so this was the only one of the plan changes that ended up, apart from 7 and 8 and 1 that was contested. And so we had really awesome support from the compliance and the consents team, some witnesses who were only first or second time in the Environment Court, and ORC's evidence was really favoured by the judge. It was a really, really good outcome and a really good, robust decision. So we really just want to acknowledge it might be Delina and I sitting here, but it really was a team ORC. The science team's evidence was uncontested. So it was a really good team effort. So I just really want to acknowledge that. And again, we had a joint position with our iwi partners in the Environment Court, which was a really good, solid position to be on. So
Well, the governance team pass on our thanks and express our gratitude, because these are sort of like mountains to climb from a planning perspective, figuratively speaking. So it's great to finally get to this point.
Yeah,
thank you all.
Can I pass on just, since it is a public meeting, that to the people out there who were part of this too, because it wasn't just our staff internally, which is good. Some of this was settled at mediation, and that is a hugely important thing from our point of view, that people out there can come to the party and get a mediated settlement and things, and that was really important. So I think we should say hands up to the people who were involved in that and made that happen as well, because it wasn't just at our end, everyone needed to come to that party.
Thank you, Hillary. Brian.
Ditto. Water quality, I'd just like to, heads up to everybody involved, staff, stakeholders, everybody. And it's just, this is a positive step forward, but it's not the end of the road. It's not, and this was a theme, throughout this plan change at 8. It filled a gap, it made an improvement, and now we're focusing on a land and water plan under another time frame, and that in itself will be another positive step forward. So incrementally, we're making progress. Neither step needs to be absolutely perfect, but it needs to be in the right direction, and it needs to be positive improvement. So thank you.
Based on the last two speakers, I don't think there are any questions. So with someone
Happy to move.
Happy to move. Thank you, Kate.
I'll second it.
Second by Hillary. Debate, discussion. Take the first two speakers, Hillary and Brian, in the debate phase. So are there any other speakers? If not, I will put all 5 recommendations all as one. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Delina. Okay, moving on to 7.3, which is the ORC submissions lodged in the NPS, FM and NES amendments for wetlands, the NPS Indigenous Biodiversity Exposure Draft, and the Water Services Entity Bill. And these were all pre-approved by either previous council meetings or strategy or planning, or the chairs of strategy and planning having an influence over those submissions. So these, it is just for noting. I'm happy to move that the 3 submissions are noted as set out on the audit paper.
Second that.
Direction. Pause for a moment. Is there any discussion? Right.
We put a lot of positive energy in terms of these submissions for national policy to central government and so forth. At some point, will we be getting a paper telling us a feedback loop in terms of some measurement of our success or otherwise? So, for example, the report might say that over 2022, we raised 100 issues and we got traction with 10 of them, or whatever that number actually is. And if it was a number like that, we could then talk to central government and say, well, is this a constructive thing that we're doing? How do we get more traction? We can say to our community, well, it actually cost this amount of money to actually get this 10 out of 100. You know, was that a positive thing to do? We need a feedback loop. So to make sure that it's not going from here into the waste paper bin. Any comment?
Can I make a comment for starters? Well, I'm going to make it anyway. Some of these processes are quite drawn out, and there's a number of steps, obviously. And sometimes it starts off with a submission process, an exposure draft, and then there's another submission process, and then eventually, after a considerable amount of time, it eventually becomes a national policy direction. So to speak. That's all I wanted to say, but I'm probably not in a position to say any more. But Anita, did you want to comment?
Yeah, so through the chair, we have in the past, and I know we did in the MPS submission highlight where some changes that ORC had requested last time had been made, and it wasn't just ORC that had made them, but I don't know if we can quantify it as a number, but we can certainly look to do some kind of a summary report. This work program is national and local submissions, and we've had we get some really good outcomes. I think I've talked before about Blue Skin Bay and having one communal wastewater system rather than individual septic tanks on a subdivision out there. That was because ORC was involved. So we get some really good outcomes across a range of these works.
Because ORC is involved in a submission to
as an appeal to the 2GP. Sorry. So what I'm saying is this work program is national and local work. So we submit across a range of things. So we can absolutely bring a summary report back, but I don't think
that's a different situation submitting on a consent.
It's a plan change, but what I'm saying is this work program covers all of that stuff. So the same person does all of the work. And we get some really good wins. They're easy to see. Sometimes they're not as easy to see other times. It's not a numbers game, but we can absolutely highlight where there's been a positive policy change.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you could argue we should do the same for Plan Change 8. You think of all the angst that went into that. And just a short report saying, well, these were the issues and this was the outcome. What have we learned? What could we have done better so that we can avoid some of this, we evolve. I do wonder for all that. I mean, Plan Change 8, for example, we've got a document. How much did it cost us? How perfect is it? How is it going to compare with the LWRP?
Take those comments on board, Anita.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll contemplate what that might be.
Yep. Thank you. Hey, we've got Warren Henley with us. Welcome, Warren. I'm not sure whether you've heard the conversation at the start of this item or not. Your item.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. No, I've got nothing to add at this point. So unless there's any questions, Anita or I can answer beyond what Councillor has raised.
Yep. And thanks for being with us. Any other queries, Hilary?
Following on from Brian's query, seems to me it's quite useful to look at the effectiveness of what we're doing and the resources that we're spending on doing it. And I wondered whether that could be carried through to doing the same thing with people who make submissions to us as to whether they get any useful tractions out of it and whether they're wasting their time or whether they're getting good results from it all. you know, so as, and when things change, because there's two bits, and Brian's suggested a variety of areas that comes in. There's when people make submissions, and then if they're not accepted at submissions, whether they do get accepted in like the Environment Court or somewhere, so that we find out what effect we're having in this process on the people who do that to us as well.
Yes.
So as we know how much of our resources we're using to do something that turns out we lose anyway or whatever, and how much of the submitters, what they had to do to achieve that. So I'm just saying, mirror that process, whatever you would do with,
So through
where we go upwards to the people who go, for want of a better word, downwards.
So through the chair, there's already transparency over submissions to ORC through things like Section 42A reports. To actually do the type of report that Councillor Calvert's talking about will be a significant piece of work that we're not currently resourced to do. So we'd have to stop doing the work that we're doing in terms of submitting and to give you a report on how successful we've been on submitting. So happy to do it, but it will require Lauren to stop what he's doing, divert around to tell you about previous successes or otherwise.
I'd be interested to see whether there's other ways of achieving that without taking a whole lot of our time. Presumably when people are making submissions to us, we want to know whether they're successful with the changes they're suggesting and at which level they had to take it to be successful, because we need to know whether next time would we resist that change again or whatever. I'm saying surely we must know that to improve our process.
So we're always learning and trying to make things better. We don't go into any of these processes trying to make the same mistake twice if it is a mistake. Section 42A reports always directly deal with submissions and then decisions, do something else, and then there is an appeal period. It's not quite a linear process, however. It's not a one-on-one relationship that someone's asked for something and then they've got, I think we talked earlier about strategy and planning, that there's often multiple ways to achieve the same outcome. So something that somebody might be seeking can be achieved different ways. So it's not quite as straightforward as that, but there is transparency already through the RMA processes, through reporting on that stuff. And Environment Court mediation documents are, once they're filed, they're all public documents. So it's all out there.
I was thinking of a summary learnings paper.
Thank you, Anita. Pim would like to respond, then I'll go to Kate and then Gary on Zoom.
Well, I'm always going to say as an economist that there's never any harm in evaluating process from an efficiency perspective. So I didn't actually have a problem with either Brian or Hillary's question, really, Anita. I think we do have to evaluate the effectiveness of a process and the cost and benefit of a particular process. So, and I wouldn't want to take some of your staff away from what they're doing, but you know, in a general way, we should be considering whether there's a cost or a benefit from people submitting to us. In the same way as I'd expect central government, won't obviously point out that Shannon's listening to us right now, but they should also take note of our submissions and give us some benefit of some feedback in terms of the value of us submitting to them, because it's an expense. And so we have to take into account whether it's worth doing, frankly. Now that's simply a value for money concept.
So we make that decision. We make that decision every time we make a decision about whether or not we choose.
Easy,
what can we gain from it? What will it cost us? Is the benefit there?
No, it's not easy to do this because the evaluation often has to happen afterward. So yeah, I hear what you're saying in terms of judgment calls at the start of a process, but sometimes we need to evaluate the effectiveness of that process as an organisation, looking back on what we've been doing. Yeah, so I actually, my view is that we should be doing that sort of work.
Thank you. Kate.
I'm very happy to move these reports, these recommendations.
Been moved and seconded.
Yeah. Oh, did you say Gary has his hand up? Oh.
Yeah, I'm just going to
go. Sorry, apologies about that. I will talk to them. Only because everyone's talking about what should have been discussed in the previous one. I'll just note that this plan change 8, if we want feedback, is it took 2 years to do something that could have been resolved within 6 weeks had some of us moved at the time to go through a non-formal mediation process. And instead we went through a really expensive process with the EPA. Sometimes we should be reflecting on that. And if you want to reflect, then and everyone's opened it up, I'm really happy to have that discussion. further. We chose the most expensive route to have that debate, and it most expensive because it took 2 years to do when we could have done it a lot quicker. So since everyone else has opened it up, I'm just going to say, can we please reflect on this in a constructive way?
Okay,
In
hey,
other ways.
let's just focus on 7.3.
Well, everyone else has spoken about.
Gary.
Thank you. I know we have discussed this before, and it's highlighted in the report around speaking to the submissions. To me, that's the ability for anyone or the commissioners or whatever to a select committee, whoever, to ask questions of the submitter. And so what is the trigger for us to speak to our submission for each of those that we've highlighted there?
So through the chair, there's not always the opportunity. In fact, there's not very often the opportunity to speak to these. They're often just taken and compiled internally. From my memory in the last 5 or 6 years, I recall 2 occasions where there's been an opportunity to speak, and we'll always make that known to the relevant, in this instance, the chair, if that's an opportunity to take up. But they're just often not opportunities that exist.
Thank you.
But if the opportunity is there, we always try to take it up.
We would always absolutely make appropriate people aware of it. Yeah, and happy to support that at a staff level as well.
Right. Okay. But no, that's cool. Thank you.
Given.
Yeah, look, I just think, just endorsing some of the things that I've heard now, it's all about reviewing, reflecting, and then adjusting to improve. So we've probably got to have that in our mentality anyway. But I'd also put that out as an opportunity, put that out to the original proposal of the MPSFM and the NESF, that perhaps, and if we also look at winter grazing that we've just gone through as well, the government is putting some very, very good things down around improving water quality, improving the environment. But I just wonder if they could reflect, and I'm happy to talk to anyone you want me to talk to about it, is reflect on before they send something out, that a wee bit more of this sort of groundwork is done before the actual documents do come out. Because there's 67 questions that we've just gone and answered on the review of these two items now. So it would be really good to have that sooner and discussed sooner. And a lot of this cost, because at the end of the day, it's the same people paying the bills. It would be great to have a system where up above, where government could actually reflect and review and say, well, is there a better and more efficient way of doing it? So if I need to talk to someone, it would be really good to have that opportunity. But great ideas, but let's get the process a wee bit better. Thank you. Happy to support the motion.
Thank you. Michael Laws.
I just wanted to clarify, if I may, the submissions that are attached to this report, they are not related to legislation through Parliament.
So through the chair, one of them is the Water Services Entities Bill, which is through Parliament. The other 2 are to central government departments.
Right, and so the Water Services Entities Bill attracted 88,000 submissions, and the government just said they could all go in the rubbish bin anyhow because we're only going to spend 4 days on it. So we wouldn't have had a realistic opportunity to present on it anyhow, would we?
I can't actually answer that, Councillor Laws. I'm not sure whether or not there was a submission process as to a speaking opportunity available or not.
Well, you could ask for one. So when you make your submission to Parliament, you can ask to be heard by the select committee. It's usually straight up front in your preamble. We wish to speak to this submission. Do we do that?
We haven't in this instance.
Well, can I suggest we do that in the future?
Yes, absolutely.
Particularly with such an important piece of legislation. And that would certainly be anything that comes out of the RMA reform and local government reform as well. And Andrew, really, it's you that should be fronting it as the chair. And you just put at the front of your submission, we wish to be heard on this submission. If you don't do that, then you won't be heard. Pretty simple.
I have spoken, I suppose, or presented a couple of submissions over the last, I don't know, bit over 2 years on other
Yeah.
matters, not associated with these ones. But yeah. Thank you, Hillary.
Just really, it's a question. I presume this water services entities bill came through before Pim had suggested that we have a whole of council approach to these things.
So this was a whole of council response? This
No, it
came-
isn't. It says it's a staff one.
Oh, sorry, so there's a staff submission, but it came through council for feedback before it was lodged
Well, I
because
thought,
of the timing.
yeah, I thought we had agreed that we would not send staff submissions, that we would send council submissions. There would be one submission from the council,
So it was all about,
not staff submissions.
it was all about timing, obviously, to meet the close of submissions. It didn't line up with our meeting schedule. So we had obviously indicated to submit either through a council meeting or strategy and planning. And if it didn't meet the time frame, we had as a backup the chairs of strategy and planning fed into at least one of the submissions. So we had some political involvement and improvement through the process.
But we were going to send them in as whole of organisation
Yes, yeah.
submissions. And this
I'm
one,
trying to remember what I promised actually.
Well,
But I think I'm pretty sure what I promised was that that submissions should come from ORC as an organisation.
that's what I heard.
And therefore they would be council submissions. But from time to time, council might choose to delegate that submission to staff or to the chief executive. That's not uncommon. But it wouldn't be our decision. Does that make sense? It would be yours.
It
ultimately.
wouldn't be a staff submission then.
And
It
it
would
still wouldn't be a
our
staff submission, it'd be a
submission,
delegated
which the
submission. I
delegate,
agree.
and so it wouldn't come out looking like this,
I agree with
I
that.
think. So if we could just watch out for,
so what I would suggest we should do in the next training, because we have a process for how we submit on these and what they are that council has signed off in the past on 2 occasions. So I suggest for the new training, we bring that back for the new council to decide how they want to process it. We lodge a lot of staff submissions on a lot of operational matters. And some of these submissions were, for example, the MPSIB one, they asked for it to be an operational submission. It was a start council one, and that's fine. But we have mapped that out. I think the best thing to do would just be to bring it back and to make sure the new council is still comfortable or want, whatever they want to, how they want that to go would be the best way to approach that.
Yeah, so it still comes down to delegations, Anita.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how simple it is. So,
Yes.
Ultimately, if it should still be an organisational submission, irrespective of where it comes from. And if it's only staff that are working on it, and it doesn't need to come to council for the reasons that you've just described, because it's operational, and then it would be a delegated submission from council through the chief executive, potentially to you, and it would still go out as a delegated submission from ORC.
Yes.
Yep.
I don't think it needs to go to the next training in particular. I think there's a system which you've outlined that
That's what most organisations do.
And I imagine through the review of the delegation manual. So
It's an easy one.
the new council to pick up on.
I just think through the delegation, we want to ensure that you are getting the full backing of the whole organisation. So whenever we get you to do something, it is coming from the organisation. So it's, I think that might hopefully give more, not that you're, say my word right correctly here, that not that your expertise doesn't give it the full amount of weight, but if it is also from the organisation, I think that's everyone with it.
Excellent. No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Anita. Move on to 7.4. This is the Zero Carbon Alliance. This is a report noting. We have Francisco, I believe, with us.
and
And Anne, welcome both of you. The report provides council with an update on the Zero Carbon Alliance and presents the updated formal documentation for the council to consider. There's 4 attachments. The first one is the terms of reference, the Zero Carbon Collaboration Group. The second one is the working terms of reference for the key representatives. Then we've got the tracked changes to the MOU, and then we've got the clean updated MOU attached as well. Just going to suggest that the recommendation 1 is we just note the report. And I'll also note that this did go past council middle of last year or thereabouts and was approved. I was left with the delegation to sign it off, but because of some changes of members to the alliance, plus some other minor amendments as well, we thought it was prudent to bring it back to council to obviously note those amendments to both the terms of reference, or the MOU, I should say, and so that's why we're here. Francesco, is there anything you wanted to comment on?
No, I think that's a pretty succinct summary of what's the process has been. You'll note that the biggest change has just been the removal of Runaka as a direct party of the agreement at their request, and a bunch of other minor changes as described in paragraph 11.
Excellent. And anything you wanted to add?
Nope.
If not, we'll just go to questions first and then someone to move the recommendation. Brian. And then I'll go to Michael Deaker, then Michael Laws.
Cool. At the Portago presentation some of us went to last night, it was interesting that in terms of mitigation, carbon mitigation, it's a bit of a challenge. And so I'm looking at this report here, and I'm just trying to figure out, how many real gains this group will get. I'm also, my understanding it's just Dunedin as opposed to the Otago region. I'm hoping it's not going to be a talk fest, that there's going to be some real gains out of it. I see the name of it is Zero Carbon Alliance. But what actually is the target? It would be nice to have a target in there that creates some tension and some outcomes. What is there a target? I know it says zero carbon, but is there a target?
Well, that's probably the target.
Hang on, Michael.
Sounds like a target.
I'm not 100% sure that it is, so.
No, hang on, Brian, just let.
Yeah.
Just go answer your question, please.
The DCC's original intention was net zero by 2030. That's why the group was originally called Zero Carbon Alliance 2030, but they're doing some work led by staff to figure out what the actual targets would be, with 2030 still being an aspirational goal.
So we've got an aspirational goal of that, but you're doing some homework to see how real it actually is.
Their staff is doing some homework to see how real it is.
Yeah. Okay.
And clearly this aligns with our strategic direction.
Yeah.
In terms of.
Well, don't get me wrong, I want something real and I want us to achieve.
You know, exactly. Yeah.
So if we're going to achieve zero carbon in Dunedin by 2030, great. I hope we do.
Name will remind them.
Doesn't it still click at any time?
Hang on. Hang on. We'll go to Michael Deaker, then Michael Laws, and then Alexa.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask Francisco, because I couldn't see it in the paper, what the costs are that we're committing to in this. Totally worthy organisation, I'm sure, and it's the sort of thing that will need to happen more often. But I'm wondering how much investment we're putting into this. Can you answer that, Francisco?
I think it's just staff time initially of the people going to the Zero Carbon Alliance meetings. Eventually, the collaboration group might agree on some case-to-case projects, but my understanding is that there's no upfront costs associated with it.
We need to commit to an organisational inventory on an annual basis, which we have done anyway.
Yeah.
Which we were doing anyway.
Which we were
so,
planning anyway,
yeah.
Just a second sub-question, Mr. Chair, if I might. That, I can't remember his name, but down on by the new hospital site, there's that big South Heat or Dunedin Heat or something like that plant that produces hot water for university, hospital, etc. Is that part of the Zero Carbon Alliance framework?
Discussions about the hospital have come in during the provisional group, and as it is in Dunedin, that's part of the sort of energy target for the city, so it would fit into the framework of the Zero Carbon Alliance.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Michael Laws.
Just a couple of questions. It is only Dunedin. That is correct. I see 2030 stopped becoming a target. It's now an aspirational goal. But the third one is, if it's an alliance between the ORC and the Dunedin City Council, why isn't the government involved? Why aren't government departments involved? Where's central government in this? Why is local government going it alone?
The proposed initial membership were entities within the city. I think the intention was to eventually include major employers in the city, which would include government departments such as ACC. You could argue that under the new centralized structure of Health New Zealand, that the government is a party in this, and as well as the new unified polytech structure.
Sorry, Michael, I think.
I'm struggling to understand why largest employer, Ministry of Health, DHB, what used to be the DHB, Otago University students with 22,000 students and God knows how many thousand staff. If you're really serious about, I mean, this is just garbage, but it doesn't matter. If you're really serious about having an alliance, why don't you ally those central government organisations with this as well? Why, if you're setting such an aspirational goal of target 2030, wouldn't you try and link a whole series of other people into it?
Otago University is part of the alliance, as is the former Southern DHB.
And Polytech.
Yeah.
And the Polytech as well.
And the Polytech, yeah. They're in there. He's muted anyway.
He's muted himself.
Yep. Alexa.
It just says the alliance is here between the IRC and the DCC.
So
Ready for me? Or are you still going, Michael?
What page
No, I'm just asking.
Michael, just repeat your question, please.
Okay. The alliance, the alliance is between us and where are the signatories in this report?
So DCC, University of Otago and the Otago Polytech. Well, what was the Otago Polytech?
Health New Zealand.
Where are they on this report?
Page 196, on 196 of diligent, but yours is handwritten, so it might be a couple back.
Oh, right. Okay. So the government, so ACC's, you're right, not there. Neither's the Ministry of Education. None of the government departments that are in here are on that either. I mean, the University of Otago is one structure. What about all the schools?
I think the intention was to stand up this group using the entities that were based in the Dunedin city at the time, and then eventually expand the alliance to not only major government employees, but eventually private business, as that's my understanding of how the Zero Carbon Alliance was intended to unfold. But it seemed, I think they made a pragmatic decision to stand it up using institutional partners that had a big presence in the city already and weren't sort of directed.
Rather than their employer, the New Zealand government.
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
And one thing, and the interpretation, it's got 0 target, 2030 target means the citywide emissions reduction target adopted by the DCC. That doesn't sound aspirational to me. So I'm reading the memorandum of agreement. It's the last item under agreement interpretation on page 197 of my paper.
Yes, this was one of the changes that I noted that changed from the draft MOU that came last year to here. They're doing the DCC staff are doing some scoping work to understand what the right target should be for the city. But 2030 still, as I understand it, remains as the aspirational goal.
So is that going to be put into the memorandum of understanding? Because at the moment it doesn't reflect that, does it?
No, it's intended to give effect to whatever the target that they scope out will be.
Right, so this is going to come back to us after today.
Isn't it going to be an ongoing, evolving process that the parties will determine?
Yeah, it will be part of
what the actual target is, whether the date ever is settled, or is it project based, or is it or whatever? But Amanda is going to help us here.
I was just going to add, when this was being considered, the DCC were clear that members didn't have to adopt the same 2030 target. So we can be a member of the alliance. The alliance itself doesn't necessarily have a 2030 target. Dunedin and DCC have adopted a 2030 target for the city, and setting up this is one way to contribute to that, because we're all, in terms of our own what we emit and what we contribute to that.
Can I respond to that just by saying?
Just hang on, Michael. Just let Amanda finish. Is there anything else?
Sure.
I was just going to say, I think the two sit alongside each other comfortably.
Thank you,
Michael. Well, I mean, it says a memorandum of understanding in relation to the establishment of a zero carbon alliance, and there it lists the 5 organisations that are going to sign this. We're one of them. And there it is under interpretation. City zero carbon 2030 target means a citywide emission reduction target adopted by the DCC. It's not an aspirational goal. It doesn't say you can opt out. Where does it say that in this?
Page 1.
Page 1.
Okay, moving on.
No,
Alexa.
at the start, sorry.
Thanks, Michael. Alexa.
Thanks, Chair. I'm seeing some value in this, and it's mainly because of relationships and so on. But my question, I'm concerned that there is a risk in joining something that's in the front end of the document is only about carbon. Further into the TOR, we see that it's actually about other things as well. But I'd like to know, Francisca, what you think about, if you think that there is value and that by us joining this, we are adding strength in terms of bringing down emissions, and also your thoughts around any risk in concentrating only on carbon when there's so many aspects that need to be dealt with simultaneously. Have you got? I just don't want us to join something and think that's it.
Let's go.
The point A, even though it's called the Zero Carbon Alliance, point A in the introduction makes clear that it's citywide greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not necessarily purely focused on carbon. I expect other climate forcing gases like HFCs will come into the conversation. And I think there is absolutely value in joining this. Climate change is an issue which requires collaboration and understanding across the different players in the city. And we can be part of influencing the discussion and helping meet the regional leadership aspirations that we've set up in our strategic directions and in our long-term plan by becoming part of this alliance.
Thanks, Francisca. I totally agree with you, frankly, but I'm just wondering if at some point, and I'm not suggesting we do this now, but at some point we think about changing that name. to reflect this is GHGs and a wider problem, and we are a collaborative bunch working together on the bigger problem. So we don't get people going, oh, that's not carbon, we're not doing that.
Thank you. Anne, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Alexa, that one of the issues is that, or not issues, but this is part of a larger process for us. We obviously have the regional picture. And I think once we have actually charted that in more detail, the role of this actually will be, and this will help us because they have a lot of experience and knowledge to bring to our regional process. So we're going to really benefit from that. But it will be easier to see the whole picture once we have actually, it's embedded in a regional approach.
Thanks, Anne.
It seems to me that we're all interested parties. We've got skin in the game here, and the ability to be able to share information and work collaboratively together seems to make a lot of sense to me. Kevin and Hillary.
Look, I was just happy to move all 5 motions.
Thank you.
All 5 recommendations. And the only comment I'd like to make on them is that I particularly note number 5, which I think number 5 is a 6-monthly report that we'll get back, and I think we'll get a clear picture of what the targets have been set and where we're actually heading, and be able to make adjustments appropriately then. So thank you.
Thank you. Hillary, were you happy to second the motion, or you had a question?
I had a question.
Okay.
I was second.
Kate will second. Thank you. Okay, so back to question, then we'll finish off the debate.
My question, and I appreciate that not everybody thinks words need to mean what they say, but these words, I can't marry up something that says it's 0 for 2030, and then something else that says our staff, our representative along there, which I guess is PIM, or whatever, is going to develop this as it goes along, and it will become a living document, sort of. This is not a living document.
Are we on a particular page, Hillary, just so we're...
well, that one was page 197, but I'm just trying to figure out, is this a living document, which is just a background of our staff will go away and come back to us with a suggestion that other people in Dunedin would like to go in a particular direction? Or does it mean what it says when it says 0 carbon by 2030? Or is it just sort of an aspirational piece of thing saying that we sort of quite like to be together with other people and they're well-meaning people? I'd like to know what it actually, have we handed over our decision making? Is there any decisions being made here? This says it is, as Michael says. If it's the whole thing should say memorandum of understanding, aspirational or something, just to give an idea that this is a sort of a warm, fairly goody thing that we can develop over a period, and it will turn into something. I just don't know what it doesn't, the words don't mean what you've described them as meaning. And if it's going to be developed by staff over a period, we should be part of that. We shouldn't be sending people off to go and talk to other people who come back to us and say, the Alliance has all agreed that will now reduce the target to 0 carbon in 2025, for example, because we've decided that's a good idea. Where does that leave us? Do these words mean what they say, or is the whole thing just an aspirational, let's get together and try and support each other in achieving a reduction in carbon and other things, as Alexa pointed out?
If you go to the introduction, under A, it suggests there about wishing to collaborate on emissions monitoring and reduction initiatives. So that to me would suggest that, there's some work that's going to happen that will target reducing our carbon footprint going forward. And we've already got commitments in our long-term plan to do certain things, but I suppose collectively working as a group, it just seems to make sense that we avoid duplication and those sorts of things. And this group probably has that ability to ensure that we understand what's happening in other parts of Dunedin and ORC, but it just seems to make, like I said before, we've got common interest here and working collaboratively together.
If we could stick with introduction A, B and C, That'd be peachy. It's just when we start describing it as bits that the whole thing doesn't hold its wee hands together as far as I can see.
Oh, that's certainly the introduction in the MOU.
Yeah, but it goes on to say something that we say is not true at all in the interpretation.
But the purpose says to support that aspirational target. It doesn't say that the organisations in the alliance adopt the target. It's not saying that.
No, but
it's saying we support. The alliance is about supporting a program to reduce emissions.
When Cisco said that this group would develop their own ideas about what that means, and I'm just saying, without us, good luck there.
But we don't. Even without that, even without knowing that that's what they're actually trying to do some more work to set a more specific target. Without that, the alliance is still functioning because it's about supporting a direction.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Richard and Kevin.
I think it's really important that we are part of this alliance. If nobody cares locally, then nothing happens globally. So somebody needs to care. And if that's not local government as our local leaders, then who is that? So we need to be part of this. I think that the purpose is really useful. It's not number one on the purpose, but the first step there is understanding Dunedin's emissions profile, which is going to be really helpful for us as a city to really know where we stand. And then from there, there's a number of positive things that we will do with the city and our other partners there through the alliance. And no doubt that will grow over time and evolve. It'll be crucial that those players come back to their own organisations and feed in through the process. So I take Hillary's point, that will need to happen and will happen. There's greater visibility and support for existing collaborative emission reducing initiatives as a purpose, a sharing of good practice, and we're talking about both organisational, so all our own organisations and what we do, but not just that, it's also citywide emissions and understanding what those are and then working with that is part of that purpose. And identifying additional collaborative opportunities and coming up with a citywide emission reduction plan. So it's not just pie in the sky stuff, and at the moment it's towards zero carbon by 2030. So that's all good and it will grow. So why we wouldn't, it's just obvious that we want to be part of this and we're going to be, and that's great.
Are there any other speakers before I go back to Kevin for his right of reply?
I'd like to speak very briefly because although that question was I speak as a lawyer here. It says here, in pursuit of these objectives, the parties each agree to use best endeavours to support the development of a citywide emissions reduction plan to give effect to zero carbon 2030 target. That commits us in the way a lawyer would talk when they use best endeavours. That would mean that we are committing to doing the best we can to have zero carbon emissions by 2030. So we may want to do that or we may not want to, but that is what these words say. This is not an aspiration, it is we agree to use our best endeavours. And we've got people in our community who it turns out we can put our hands very deep into their pockets and have any amount of money we want to take from them. And so our best endeavours can be quite expensive. We are committing to doing this in this document.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Michael Laws.
I just want to back Hillary up completely and introduce you to the words to give effect to, which is under purpose 1F, opportunities to input into the development of the citywide
Rosie.
Are there any other speakers? If not, could someone just text Michael?
Target,
I think we
that
can-
is a clear policy directive.
Michael, could you start again? You froze.
Sorry, okay. I just wanted to say how much I supported what Hilary Calvert's just said, and I want to introduce you to purpose section 1 of the draft terms of reference. Section 1(1)(f). Opportunities to input into the development of a city-wide emissions reduction plan. That would be fine if it stopped there. To give effect to the zero carbon 2030 target. The words give effect to are words that are not aspirational. They are a directive and direction and would be interpreted as such. And the fact that you then go to the interpretation section of this agreement and find out what zero carbon target 2030 target means, it means the city-wide emissions reduction target adopted by the DCC. Quite apart from the fact that this document won't make a blind bit of difference to climate change, and is being done, it would seem, independently of government directive, and local government always gets into trouble when it goes alone on a big issue, when it should stick to its own knitting. The truth of the matter, this is a contradictory, the document contradicts the information that we have been provided today. If this just had aspirational targets printed all over it, I'd be happy. It doesn't. It's a directive, and that's the way it'll be interpreted. The second issue relates to Dunedin. Yeah, good on you. We don't feel, typical of the ORC, to be perfectly honest with you. Let's forget the rest of Otago. Let's just go it alone in Dunedin, shall we? Which is so typical of the ORC on just about everything. No, I've had enough of you will decide to do a policy on climate and emissions, but will exclude everywhere else in Otago apart from Dunedin. This is a regional council. So I would have thought that if you're going to look at something like collaborating on sharing information and things like that, and we're trying to understand the emissions profile of Otago, not just Dunedin, there might have been something there that was going to give us some indication that this would be extended well beyond the bounds. I won't be voting for this, but I'm certainly not going to support what I see as just a little bit of form of politicking and gesture seeking, because that's all it looks like to me.
Thanks, Michael. Hey, there's a couple of things. The Mayoral Forum has a standing item on the agenda where Francisco reports on the conversations and dialogue that he's having with his counterparts around the region in terms of understanding where each territorial local authority is at, and as they embrace the concept of zero carbon and dealing with climate change. So that's fundamentally it's a key role of his. But Pim,
funnily enough, I was going to say exactly what Andrew just said. Francisco's job is across the whole region, isn't it, Francisco? Maybe you could answer that best just by explaining that. Some of your other comments, Michael, I don't disagree with. And but remember, this is a Dunedin City initiative, so they've focused on Dunedin City. And personally, I see this a little bit like the road to zero that Waka Kotahi has around road deaths.
That's a very good analogy, Pim.
Yeah,
good analogy.
Very unlikely ever to happen. But so from my perspective, I wouldn't mind for us to put aspirational into those words like you've suggested. And maybe, Francisco, you could suggest that to the City Council. But this is their initiative, and we've chosen to support it because we're an environmental council. We can argue about the wording. I've got sympathy for Michael and Hilary's viewpoint. But Francisco, could you just explain how you do your job? Because you're really our only resource in this space, by the way.
So I take your point that this agreement is quite Dunedin-centric because it is led by the Dunedin City Council, but the ORC is leading a collaborative approach towards climate change. We've already led two pieces of work in the adaptation and mitigation space. The first being the climate change risk assessment, which the TLAs all over the region are using. And the second is the greenhouse gas inventory. We're using the relationships and the precedent we've set in taking a leadership approach on those to continue working in concert with the TLAs to progress the climate change conversation. We've already got a date set for the first sort of working group meeting so that we can workshop how we can work together as a region and advance the climate change conversation that way. So I see this as something that will, deepen our relationship in the Dunedin context with the Dunedin City Council, but doesn't exclude us from taking a leadership lens to the issue.
Then could I move a motion, perhaps with Hillary's backing, that we...
Michael, can you just hold fire? We've already got.
Sorry,
we've already got. Kevin's already moved the 5 recommendations in front of us. So let's just deal with those. If you want to move an amendment or anything like that, that's the only opportunity that you have. But anyway, are there any further speakers to the 5 motions that are in front of us? And then I'll go back to Kevin for his right of reply if he wants to exercise his right of reply. No other speakers?
I was just going to make a comment after what we have heard in relation to what is proposed by our learned colleagues, that the clause F in 1.1 seems to be the clause that is written in such a way that puts the greatest pressure on us to give effect. So if we altered that one sentence and took it back to DC without, which would not undermine the intent of the document, which would simply say, citywide reductions plan to work towards the aspirational target of zero carbon 2030. Reduction plan to work towards the aspirational target of zero carbon 2030.
In 5.3i, just to tidy that picture.
Yeah, exactly. So we can.
That doesn't stop any progress. It's just because I agree that to give effect would be say start rating and start doing things to make that happen.
That's exactly right.
So the question is, we can suggest the changes, and obviously through Pim and Francesco, they would take that back essentially to the DCC to be ratified. I don't believe we can actually change the document on the fly here and now, but we can certainly make a recommendation to pick up on the amendment that you suggested.
But if we wanted to be a bit tougher, we could also say that we're not prepared to join the alliance unless they make those changes, Francisco. So we could be a bit tougher on this.
Yeah, well, the only problem is last year we actually joined, and this is just an update, sort of from the working group that's been
just feedback,
pulling the various strands together. Where there's been the amendments, there's been the change in personnel in terms of the partners in the group. So
I would suggest that the wording in 5.3i would say use best endeavours to support the development of citywide emissions reduction plan to give effect to the words in the interpretation 1.1, and then change the words in 1.1 to be what Kevin just said.
So so you picked up on the theme, the concerns raised. So you will come back to the discussions that you have for the next step. So we can progress with the recommendations in front of us, remembering we've already joined the alliance 12 months or so ago. Okay.
And just my right of reply. Listen, this document for DCC, I can hear by what Francisco is saying. This is a reality check. They want to get to 2030 and zero carbon, but in reality, they've got bigger hurdles than they possibly think. They had emissions from 2015 to 2020 that rose, transport emissions that rose in the city by 30%. And that's reported by them in the ODT at the time. So we need to get this going, and we need to find the exact figures and get working on it. Back in 6 months is a report, and we'll tweak it to suit. Thank you.
So moved by Kevin, seconded by Kate. I'll put those 5 recommendations.
With those amendments.
Yeah. So
As amended, yeah.
Yeah. So they've picked up, staff have picked up the theme about the 2 concerns that have been raised, correct? And you'll take that back to the city, correct?
Mr. Chairman.
We will do exactly what you're telling us to do, which is we'll feedback this conversation to the city.
Exactly.
Amanda's just mentioned they've already adopted it, so they can respond to us once we give them the feedback.
Exactly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Michael.
Except recommendation 2 notes the chair will sign the revised memorandum of understanding incorporating the updated terms of reference. So it hasn't, at the moment, the resolution contradicts what's just been said. You're simply going to sign this revised memorandum of understanding on behalf of the ORC.
With the alterations proposed.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, Hilary. You need those words added into recommendation 2, which is what Kevin has said too.
Well, make it really clear then what the words are.
Well, can I suggest then that the recommendation 2 notes the chairs will sign their revised memorandum of understanding incorporating up to terms of reference, comma, as amended by this meeting. End of comma. And then
C is under instructions to relay the wording that we wanted into it. So I'm comfortable with that.
And if you amended the motion, then it's very clear.
Okay, cool. No further discussion. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you, Anne. Moving on to item 7.5.
Thank you.
Living wage for bus drivers. This report is provided to seek council's direction to increase the wage rate to the equivalent to the September 2022 living wage for bus drivers driving council contracted bus services. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, Gary. Welcome, Doug, and Gavin online. Doug, you are obviously the author of the report. Got some tough times at the moment. Doug, obviously, just out there on the streets with trying to satisfy passengers' needs under pretty trying circumstances at our end. Obviously, trying circumstances at their end. This is a step in the right direction that we've got in front of us. So in your hands.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that that's the best way to describe it as a step towards something more comprehensive. The purpose of this report is to ask council to approve increasing our driver wage rates to the living wage of September 2022, which have just been released. So that takes it from $22.75 an hour to $23.65 an hour. And the comments by Mr. Saville acknowledge that. We have tried to keep in communication with the union. It is a complex arrangement. It's not just one union. I think there are 3 involved in bus transport, certainly down here. And so our communication with them is going to be ongoing. Mr. Saville also pointed out other councils are moving on this as well and already have moved on that. Examples with Auckland Transport and Greater Wellington. They've moved reasonably rapidly on this. They have taken it above the living wage. So I think this is an opening gambit for us. Keeping in line with the living wage is very, very important, but also looking at what else we can do to increase recruitment and retention of drivers. I was not aware there were 2,000 P endorsed people in Otago. It's an astounding number. I can't speak to the reasons why they're not all bus drivers, but it probably needs a far more complex analysis of that. One of the things that's coming out of this report, of course, is that we're committed to doing a further report to council, which will be far more comprehensive. And what we want to do is provide council with a number of options of how to get recruitment and retention up, but also a number of options of how to make it a far more attractive process. I've just finished discussions with GoBus in the local area about having a co-branded training program, which we can do, which can actually be TEC funded if we do it in the right way, where the trainee will get a qualification as well as a cadetship through the driver training program. So they are absolutely open to doing these things. So we're going to be designing that, and that'll be a feature of our future report to council. I think that probably covers everything in there. With our second report, we will be looking at everything: fare structure, driver wages and conditions, all the impacts, all the tranches of work that we need to do, and the variables we have to address to make sure that we can get this progressed into a more comfortable area.
Can you just elaborate on? Can you just elaborate on the conversation with Waka Kotahi and understanding the availability of the additional funding that's been announced? There still seems to be a month or two before real clarity around what we've got to do, or any provider of passenger transport services or public transport services, what needs to be done to actually secure a potential share from that fund for.
I've spoken, sorry, Council, I've spoken recently within the last 2 weeks to the National Public Transport Manager at Waka Kotahi, and they're going to deal through it with indexation, the initial steps. So I have that, I would say, commitment from Waka Kotahi. It is highly unlikely we wouldn't get that commitment for this. But there are steps to go through.
Okay, thank you.
I was actually almost going to say the same thing. Again, Andrew, you and I are on the same page. Firstly, Doug, I did want to say this is an excellent paper. You've really done a good job of this, so thank you so much. I think you've highlighted the issues. I think we're well aware of the problem we have with recruitment, that our operators are having with recruitment. And actually, regional councils can take the lead on this, as we've seen in Wellington and Auckland, and push those higher pay structures through. And this is the first step in terms of our commitment to ensuring that bus drivers continue to get the living wage, which is a previous decision of this council. And then, yes, we would look at ways of accessing that central government funded $61 million when there's more clarity. And actually, if it's funded through indexation, which is a common model that's used through public transport, as we know, that will feed through to our drivers as well. So that will be helpful, interestingly. So we'll wait to hear exactly how NZTA is going to, Waka Kotahi is going to address this problem from a national issue. But almost by definition, if we wanted to go higher than the living wage, ORC would be contributing some percentage of those increases.
That's a very good point.
Look, I thought you did a very good job of this paper. I personally support the recommendation that you put forward and the two options. And we want to get some of this money out as quickly as possible so that we can support our operators in recruiting drivers.
Excellent, thank you. I've got about half a dozen speakers here. I'll start with the first three. So we've got Kate, then Michael, Dika, and then Hilary.
Thank you. I'm going to sound contrary to Pim, I apologise for that. Today, I think, is about the 24th of August, which is 1 week before we're expecting to put this in. And so my question is, we knew this was coming. We've known we've got problems with keeping, getting drivers for a number of reasons. We've had them articulated well today. In your mind, would there have been any changes if they knew that they were going to get a pay rise on the first sooner? And my question is, normally negotiations aren't left to 1 week before. And what is the timing? Is this because the living wage wasn't announced? Is it because the government hasn't had money and shown us a way forward? Or is it something else?
I know we were waiting for the index. Like Gary, you might want to answer this one.
Yeah.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, you haven't made a decision until now to match the living wage going forward.
I appreciate that.
So the living wage is announced about 4 to 5 months before it takes effect. The agency, there's two things that got mentioned here. The agency is working on the decision you made in May 2021 about, and that was to move to the 21
living wage, about how that gets indexed over time so that it actually matches with movements in the living wage. They still haven't completed that work. That's coming, and that Mr. Rogers referred to that. The 61 million is coming out of the Climate Emergency Surf Fund, where the minister said, okay, recognising they've got that inflation thing happening, here's an extra dollop of money to raise the pay and conditions of drivers. He hasn't signed off on how that's getting released. The agencies knows that it's coming and is working on the processes that will make that happen. That will help fund, of course, what's happened in Auckland and what's happened in Wellington. And if you make further decisions in the future to lift above the living wage, how you might get a share of that.
Yeah. I sort of understand that. I think my question, and I don't want to be contrary to you,
No,
Paul,
no,
I'm sorry, but this is this year. We're going to get this every year, except for the maybe a different PTOM system, and I get all of that. I'm just wondering whether we need to be doing this front-footed earlier and getting into a better cycle. And I'm reflecting on.
Yeah, I'm going to respond to you if I can.
Yeah.
If I can,
You go for it, yes.
Andrew. This is an indirect relationship we have with bus drivers, and that's very important to understand. You know that I've worked in this industry, so the operators, we have a contract with the operators to supply us with services. Now they haven't been able to do that because of a lack of bus drivers. We don't employ bus drivers, so I'm not sure that we could have predicted the reduced service. We've just had a perfect storm here. Everything's really gone against the sector, and it's not just in Dunedin, obviously, or in Queenstown. It's right across the country. Every one of my colleagues is having the same issue. So you're asking the question: could we have predicted this a year ago and started addressing drivers' wages a bit earlier? The difficulty is that our relationship is with the operators. We've actually let a contract through a normal procurement process. Our expectation in the past has been that they've been able to provide those services and have had sufficient drivers. And this has become a real headache for us over the last 12 or 18 months, partly because we've been so reliant on migrant drivers, actually, to be perfectly honest. And of course, we haven't been able to bring those people into our country. So the issue's become far more acute. And on top of that, we've had the issue over winter, irrespective of what the tramways person said around COVID and flus. And we've had the same issue with Air New Zealand. I mean, we're really not in a very different boat from a lot of these other companies. So my view would be, yes, you could say, couldn't we have foreseen this? Couldn't we have been more proactive? But this is the process we use for procuring bus services.
Yeah, sorry, I think there's two parts of this. One is that, and we predicted that we may have to reduce services a long time ago, and we put a mechanism in place, and maybe we should have done it then. I'm reflecting on that.
Yep.
But the other part of that is something that comes on the 1st of September, and we knew it was going to come on the 1st of September. We should try and second guess that earlier than doing these negotiations 1 week before.
I see.
And there's two parts to it.
We're not doing the negotiation with drivers.
No.
Yep.
But we're doing it feels like it's like.
Doug, did you want to respond to the?
Gary,
Yeah, sorry.
And through you, Mr. Chairman. So in theory, agency inflation adjustments that we talked about back in May 2021 will mean that the index that we pay matches movements in the living wage. We're still waiting on that piece of work. The agency will only commit funding in terms of how you apply with that stuff, but they've indicated it's coming, so that next year, if you only decide to match the living wage, that should be picked up in the inflation adjustment. We shouldn't have this back to you with, now we need to move to the 23 living wage. As Mr. Rogers mentioned, we've got that next piece of work coming around. Is there some other things that we could make much better?
And we can include that 2023 work within the report that we're going to put together for the wider question.
Right, thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound critical.
One of the solutions would be that the Otago Regional Council become a living wage council. It doesn't matter whether it's indirectly paying bus drivers through contractors or directly paying a cleaner or whatever. That would give greater certainty for staff to be able to plan ahead. Just a thought. Michael, I'm just going to ask for your permission to take Hillary first, because I know she's got to leave early, and then I'll come to you, Michael Deaker, after Hillary's question. Thank you.
Thank you. Two questions. One is that finance figure is the figure when we return our services to what we had before, or is that the figure for now?
That would be a full cohort.
So that would
It's
be
calculated on
the
that.
timetable as we had before we reduced them. And how soon would the workers get their pay? We had a problem because, I gather, last time because we had all manner of problems with one bus company and not the other bus company and things. How can we, I guess part of it was making sure that when we gave them some money, they passed it on from the date that we said. So we have to figure out how much it is. We've been through that process before. Can the drivers get it soon? How long will it take for them to get it if we agreed to it now?
There is a process to go through, and it is reasonably complex, somewhat overly so. I don't know, it was certainly before my time, but I know that we've just tidied that up in recent times now with payments. So it's about balancing people who had left within that living wage period. They had to be paid out the difference. There's a number of different things that had to happen to make that happen, and it has to be ordered.
So we did that, but Gary presumably can answer. Sorry, I don't mean to, but
No,
Gary
yeah,
knows because he went through this. What tore his hair out, I think, during the process. It looks like it. And presumably now you've been through it once. It's not going to take that time to do it next time.
Mr. Chairman, it shouldn't, because you're only adjusting from September going forward. Last time we were paying 3 living wages, working out back pay. It's, as Mr. Rogers mentioned, it gets a little complicated because, of course, companies have to go, well, actually, what's the impact on leave? And there's a whole lot of other factors that come into that. So it would be, we're not going to make 1st of September, but
would you give us some idea, so as that the bus drivers who might happen to be one of them listening to this afternoon, I would think if I were them, I might be. Could you give them some Christmas idea?
It would be difficult to put an absolute date on it, but I think that
Just a sort of or a time within which or something.
Yeah, through the chair, I think because lessons have been learned in that process and how to smooth that out, we'll apply those. And certainly our finance department have been key in that, to making sure that gets done correctly. So how about I commit to coming back to you once we've done a bit of research on what the process is going to be and how we're going to set it up, and then we can give you a more definitive date.
That sounds a really good answer.
That would be good, although I gather that it could well be within a month or something. From you're saying not by the 1st of September suggests to me that maybe by the 1st of October.
If it's not, I want the computer.
Okay, sounds like you'll keep us posted as we move towards that.
So, Mr. Chair.
Confirmation.
Or a red and yellow card
Awesome.
to take with it.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
Sorry, going back to Michael Decker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to support these 5 motions, but it seems to me that what they're asking us to do is to take a bet on Waka Kotahi having the money and agreeing by the means that Doug explained before to pass it through. What I want to know is this a racing certainty or not? Because we're talking a large amount of money, over about $500,000 annualised. And I don't want to see our ratepayers hammered again with another increase in what they're going to have to pay us. So what do we do if Waka Kotahi comes through in a month's time and says, no, we've rethought this and we're not going to put the money into the index program?
I think through the chair, I think it would be, we wouldn't be compelled to meet that. I think that it's important that we invest in this industry and invest in these drivers. I
agree with you, but where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I can't be 100% on anything, no one ever can, but I would say it's extremely unlikely that it wouldn't be co-funded in the county environment. I'll continue to have my conversations with Waka Kotahi to ensure that we have some clarity on what's going to be happening. Yeah, I'll take your point, Councillor. It's a valid one.
Thank you. Brian.
I think the questions, yeah, that I was going to ask have been answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alexa?
Thanks. I'd be happy to motion when this comes, if we're nearly there. I share Michael Deaker's concern, but I think that the need of the bus drivers and the need for us to be able to provide the system is worth the bet. It's it is a bit of a bet, and I am a little bit worried about that. But what my question is, Doug, is I think this is only the start. We're going to have to put together a program to seriously lift bus driver wages over the next wee while, aren't we? And so at some point, this is going to be landing on in ratepayers' wallets. Is that right? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
I think certainly that it's something we need to address. Part of that holistic approach to public transport is to look at fares, frequencies, everything that impacts on the cost of the ratepayer, and we need to have a critical self-reflection of how we deliver on that.
And just one other question there. Apart from the government's 61 million, is there more opportunity through government to really make a step change in what we pay in drivers, pay them in money and in conditions?
I think there's always an opportunity for central government to step into that space. They've made the commitment to living wage increases, and they've made the commitment to expect living wage increases. And I think that will continue, certainly. I think it's part of the emissions reduction program they have. I think it's part of the general direction that they want us to set as regional council. So I think it will continue.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Laws. You're on mute, Michael.
The IRC contracts its bus services, its public transport services, so it can do a number of things, work out what the rates are, and then let somebody else do all the worry. And that's why we pay a little bit more than it might normally cost to do that. Over the last year, 6 months, our bus companies that we contract to do this job haven't been doing their job that they've been contracted to do. They have reduced services, they've been late, services have been cancelled. So what I haven't seen here, and I'm sure I just missed it, I'm sorry, I've put my reading glasses to one side today. Is there anything in here that says how much money that we've saved over the last financial year or so from not having the services provided that we contracted for?
No, that is outside the scope of this paper. It's specifically asking for living wage increases. It will be a feature of the follow-up paper that we're developing, and we'll address it through that. The reduced timetable is saving money because of the mere fact that we have lower services.
Okay, so what we sort of is relevant. Councillor Deaker has raised and been echoed to an extent by Councillor Forbes today, that they want to know how much this has cost, and you've put in it's going to cost an extra 0.47 million, as Councillor Deaker says, an extra $500,000 if we take this option today. Well, it may not matter, because I'm betting that that there would be a considerable sum of money saved from our contracted parties not having delivered on contracted services. So that sum of money is actually quite important in terms of what's the real cost to the ORC in this next financial year, given that there should be a considerable saving. So have you got some sort of ballpark figure that we could work on?
Not in front of me, Councillor, no.
So
well,
that,
with all due respect,
that report, I think is it due the 15th or the 28th of September? 28th September. So that number will be in that report, by the sound of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So I suppose in a roundabout way, sorry, Michael, so in a roundabout way, we can assume that it will offset the just under 500,000 for this decision today.
To a degree, it probably will, but it would not meet all of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Kevin, then Brian, and then someone was going to move, I think, Alexa.
I was just going to support Alexa, actually.
By seconding?
Yeah, by second it.
Okay,
If you're comfortable, Alexa.
you good to go, Alexa?
I'm good to go as it is.
Who's
So
going?
option two, the recommended.
Yep.
That we pay that.
And if I could just quickly speak.
Sign the words.
My biggest concern about this whole issue is that in reality, the companies that do all the employing seem to escape the ODT. So if the ODT perhaps could do some investigative journalism and find out the reluctance of companies that employ these people to actually pay them a good living wage that will attract more people, that would be a really good thing to do for the public and probably to support the 300 odd men and perhaps the 2,092 people that possibly could be bus drivers were their conditions right. So it'd be really good if the ODT could do some investigative and take the blame away from the ORC that's obviously trying to do a very good job and have a look at the real root concern. Thank you.
Okay, if I could answer that partly. So in a previous life, you know that I was representing bus operators as the chief executive of the Bus and Coach Association. Notwithstanding that, look, my view has been that bus drivers have been underpaid for a very long time. And the only way we've managed to maintain bus services has been through cheap migrant labour, pretty much throughout the whole of New Zealand. You can lay the blame with the operators or the PTOM model, which drives those costs down in a competitive marketplace. And those operators are profit maximising, so of course they're going to pay wherever they can get drivers from, the least they need to. But ultimately, I see the responsibility with the regional councils because we can contract for a better driver remuneration. I wouldn't have said this when I was in that past job for obvious reasons, because those operators don't want to pay more for bus drivers. When they pay more for bus drivers than public transport, oddly enough, they have to pay more for bus drivers who are driving coaches. They have to pay more for bus drivers who are doing school bus routes. So the operators don't want necessarily to pay their drivers more. The regional councils, as Auckland and Greater Wellington have shown us, can ensure that contracts are more reasonable and that we're not simply relying on migrant labour, cheap migrant labour and retired people to drive buses around this country. So my view is that actually we should take some of the blame as a regional council for the fact that we've allowed this workforce to be underpaid.
Thank you. So the 5 motions have been moved by Alexa, seconded by Kevin. So we're in that phase, Brian. So I assume you're speaking to those. Awesome, yeah. Brian.
Yeah, just speaking to it. I support the recommendations. After saying that, I do have some significant reservations that we've been put in this situation we're in. Okay, there might be some reasonable reasons why, but I would have expected some more information in terms of how we actually fund it. You know, whereas in principle we're saying we're putting ourselves out there 0.471 million. I would have expected some more, maybe some options, whatever. I accept there's still some information coming in. Nevertheless, as our CE has said, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility for the buses in the region, and we have a responsibility to ensure that our bus drivers are appropriately looked after. And we know that there's currently an issue. For goodness sake, it's yelling at us. So we have a responsibility to do this. But I say it again, I do have some reservations about the situation that we put in. Thank you.
Sorry, I'd like to respond to that too, Brian. Look, Doug, we actually know the numbers. It's just that we haven't got them at hand. So we know what we've saved in terms of reduced services. We know that we could have penalised the operators for not providing the service sufficiently, but we chose not to. And the reason we chose not to penalise the operators is because they've had the perfect storm as well. You know, this has been no migrant labour that they've relied on, and COVID and winter flus that we haven't had to this degree. So we've chosen not to penalise those operators because we'd end up in a worse place, frankly. But that was a decision that we made, an operational decision. So we are aware of the numbers. We are hopeful that that $470,000 that we're talking about today will be subsidised through Waka Kotahi in the usual way. They pay 51%. So our expectation is that those numbers will come down. But you're right, we don't have those numbers in front of you right now. But it doesn't change the fact that we've had cheap bus services for many, many years all over New Zealand, not just here, because we've allowed this model to undervalue a really important workforce.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any further speakers? Michael Laws and then Kate.
You are a breath of fresh air. Can I just say, thank God for some honest talking. I have to say that this is a catastrophic market failure that is not confined to public transport. I could look at the hospitality industry and the horticultural industries right now as two further industries where we have decided not to allow the free market to play, but we have decided that we are going to import labour to undercut wages to New Zealanders. And then when it all goes pear-shaped, we turn around and scream, oh my God, there's no labour, because we haven't actually been paying New Zealanders what they are worth, and we've been reliant upon almost slave labour, or certainly underpaid labour, to provide our services. This is systemic market failure. If the free market had been allowed to operate, this would never have occurred. But suddenly, here's the free market now, everybody, and the free market isn't the solution. I don't think people understand that if you make this decision today, well, I suppose in one way you can at least commend yourself on that it's incremental. But the fact of the matter is, and it's actually on section 15 of this report, you're actually already in competition with other regional councils who are paying a lot more than $23.65 an hour. And all I can tell you is that just because we live in Otago, the cost of living isn't cheaper. And I can certainly tell you in central Otago, the cost of almost everything is more expensive. So if you want to be a bus driver in Queenstown, for example, you are living in a cost of living that is considerably more than Wellington, and yet they're paying a cost of $27 an hour to driver wages. So this isn't solution today. This has to be at best an incremental step, because we actually need to compete with other sectors of the economy for the drivers that we need to deliver a public transport service in Otago. And that's the bit that this paper doesn't address to me. It's just, well, do we do the living wage? Well, listen, I don't think it's going to make a blind bit of difference, because it's still not enough to meet the market and to meet the requirements of attracting people and retaining, when they can get a lot more money than $23.65 to drive and have a lot less hassle. So I'm disappointed that this paper does not address the market as it is at the moment. Pim, you're right, 100% right. This is chickens coming home to roost in a big way. As I said, this is not the only sector that's doing it. I want to explore what one of our staff have just said to us. He said this is an opening gambit. Now, what he really means by that is, and he's picked up where I'm coming from. He's saying, well, you know, this might not do it at $23.65. And at that point, it is an opening gambit. It's not going to have people flooding back into driving our buses. So we're going to pay more than $23.65 if we expect to have the public transport service and system that our ratepayers want and have paid for, ironically. But they might not have paid enough. It's going to cost a damn sight more than $500,000 if you want to up to market public transport system that is fully staffed. I want to raise the other issue too, and Councillor Noon, the chairman, you raised it. Are we a living wage council or not? There are cleaners that are still, who are contracted to this company, who do work for us, that do not receive $23.65 an hour. I know bus drivers are important, but I would have thought anybody that works for us is important. And they seem to have been excluded by this. I think we need a policy decision on that very soon. But can I just flag, Andrew, that this isn't the end. I note that the estimated cost to do this is 4.71 million. It's recommendation number 3 today. But this is just going to just be an incremental step. And I think we require a paper for the next council that looks at both us becoming a living wage employer in general and Toto, but also looks at and makes the value judgment of will that be enough to recruit and retain our public transport bus drivers. Thank you. Andrew.
Hey, look, I'll just reply now, so I don't need to speak later, but certainly the 28th of September is targeted for that wider discussion around, the funding of public transport, rather than just the focus on where we've got today, is just focusing on the living wage approval. So we'll certainly have that wider discussion that needs to happen. And also just spoke to Pim, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago about bringing forward a paper on the 28th with regards to recommending to the new council to consider becoming a living wage council. So take that on board. Thank you. Alexa, then Gary.
I'm just going for right of reply.
Okay.
So I'll wait.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Look, really agree with Michael and with Pim previously. This decision, there isn't a decision to make today. This is an absolute no-brainer. Our buses, it's a public service. It's always going to lose money. It's always going to cost money. There's always going to be asking others for money to be supporting it. We either want it or we don't. And if we didn't make this decision today, which, as I say, is an absolute no-brainer, then it would drive even more people out of the industry. The worrying on what it might cost, to me, is a real shame, because there is a crisis amongst bus drivers and there's a crisis amongst the service. So we just have to get on with it and do it. Thank you.
Cheers, Gary. Kate, and then Gretchen.
I'm very glad. I was going to foreshadow a couple of things, but that's a living wage, and the other one is where to from here with the wages. But you sound like you've got those sorted. I'm really sad on two counts that we haven't actually talked about the value of buses, and there's been, unfortunately, tied up with a wage issue, which the cost of this is much, much greater than the loss of bus drivers. We have taken people off what should be a very low carbon footprint alternative transport that should be so efficient, should be effective, should be providing to those that cannot get there any other way. Why? Either because they cannot drive, they're too young, they're too infirm, or medical things. And we have completely undervalued this. We've completely forgotten that at the minimum wage, people have to do split shift is an absolutely appalling thing. But then to not even value them for transporting the very most important people in the world, really, and other school children or the ones that can't get there otherwise, is we have completely, as you said, a failure of the market. And I just want to reflect on that this is not a job for anyone. It isn't a low entry thing. They have to deal with some very difficult people, some very tired people, and as we heard, in conditions that aren't nice, having to drive with a mask and be exposed to getting sick so easily. It's not just the conditions of being paid well, it's being that you may be more exposed to illness and therefore should get a better sickness leave or those sort of things. And I don't think we've reflected well enough on that by narrowing this debate to a living wage. So I think what I would like to foreshadow is that it's not just about a living wage council, but we actually need to put and prioritise public transport as an absolutely key thing that we deliver at the first meeting of the next council, whoever may be on it. I would love to be on that committee, and I hope I do get voted back on, but partly because of, and we talk about this being subsidised by Waka Katoa as if it's someone else's money. There are so many people in Otago who do not get a service at all, who would like a service, who are paying for your service in Dunedin, your service in Queenstown, but don't get that subsidised or use of their own taxpayer out in Balclutha. And we've heard people in Balclutha want a service. We've heard people needing a service to hospitals, and we're not in that space. So Pim, as our leader going forward, I hope that you're going to prioritise this as something that needs a much better focus and coming occasionally to implementation and everything else. It is more than just a living wage. It's so much more and could be doing a big difference. I spent a large part of the last 15 years on, or 12 years on a regional land transport committee where one of the key cogs is missing of how we do this well. But anyway, I also would like to add, if we may, to all of those bus drivers still doing it, thank you. By God, we owe you a lot. And we should be appreciating them, because I don't think there's even that, we don't articulate that well. And we should be saying to the bus companies that who have managed to keep those ones, thank you. And for the, yeah, it's we really value it's like those people who are underpaid people babysitting. I don't understand people who wouldn't pay them well. They do our really key job.
And it's just sticks with us.
Well, no, yeah.
Okay.
We shove these things under there, and I just hate how we've done it. We need to value them better, and this doesn't do quite justice.
Thank you. We'll go back to Alexa for her right of reply. Oh, sorry, Gretchen, then we'll go back to Alexa for her right of reply.
Thank
Sorry.
you. And I do apologise that it's become repetitive, but actually this council does understand its responsibilities to treat people as they deserve to be treated, to meet the market and to provide the service that we must provide in public transport. That's, as Gary said, it's a no-brainer today. There isn't a decision to be made. This is a step that we have to take, really. It goes without saying. The next part, though, we also have all reflected on and do understand. What are our responsibilities going forward? We understand that. It's at contract time and it's a public issue. So we need to be discussing that with our public rather than around the table today, because it is about how we're going to pay for that. Because, of course, it's all very well to say at contract time we can make operators pay a fair amount, but actually it's the contract price reflects that. So we will be discussing in future timetables, efficiencies and funding options, such as whether the fares need to be adjusted and also whether rates would need to be adjusted. So those are really important conversations, and not for today, obviously. We do need to get people involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. Alexa.
Thanks, Chair, and I won't repeat, though I agree with what has been said before, but there's a couple of points that haven't been made, and I think that one of them is we've had some criticism of the PTOM, the public transport operating model, combined with migrant labour has really been a race for the bottom. We've reached that bottom now. I hope we have, goodness. And I think we're going to have to pay a lot more. This is just the start today. And, you know, if it wasn't for the need to go out and consult with our community, we should be going a lot further than we're going today. But still, this is where we are. I just want to remind those of us who are back around the table this time next year, or this time, no, not that, no, just sooner than that, later this year, and at LTP time, long-term plan time next year, to remember this conversation, remember this day, and be prepared to go out and have this conversation with our communities and our operators, because we need to budget for this. We're going to have to pick up a lot. Now, the other thing is that we've got a lot to consider. Do we take this service back in? We've got discussions with our other our TLAs. There's a whole new governance potential in the new system now that the PTOM has been replaced by the Sustainable Public Transport Framework. And I really need our staff now to start looking into this and looking at the possibilities that we have. So I really want us to do that and to make sure that we know where we're going. I mean, today's start is about building respect through pay and better conditions, although we haven't got that yet. We've only put the money up a wee bit for our drivers. That absolutely has to happen, and for all the reasons we've already heard, we need to lift that, and we're starting with the pay here today. But I really think Doug, Gary, Gavin, it's time to get straight back into this and figure out how we want this to be in the future, because I think everybody around this table wants a really good, reliable public transport system that serves the whole region. Thank you. With that, let's put it.
Thanks very much, Alexa. I'll put the 5 motions all as one. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm just going to echo Tim's comments earlier. You know, good report. Good luck with being able to, you know, trigger and get this implemented ASAP. Thank you. So much appreciated. Thank you. Moving on to 7.6. No, not yet. No. Corowaro land. Brian, you're not in New Caledonia.
Can I join the bus?
Sorry. This report is provided for council's approval of the sale of surplus land subject to ORC. Remember, there's 2 steps in this. The first one we need to deal with now is this public part of the council meeting. Either decide to sell the block or not. And if we decide to sell, then obviously in the non-public part, we then consider the terms and conditions of a actual sale. Welcome, Nick, and I'm not sure whether Peter's with you or not, but we're in your hands if there's any comments you want to make regarding the report.
No, I'll just point out, you shouldn't take the paper as read, but point out that this relates to a piece of land and a paper that came to council back in September last year. And at that point, council wanted us to go away and get an ecological assessment done. So that's been done. That's now coming forward, and that relates to the second part of the paper. So as the chair pointed out, there's this part is to say, do you want to sell the land or not? This isn't leased land. This piece of land got carved off a piece of Corowaro land when it was freeholded, but subsequently DOC, who it was intended to go to, didn't take that. So ORC's been holding it. So it's surplus to requirements. So the public paper here is to say, do you want to sell it or not? And then if you decide that that is the case, then the public excluded paper has more information on what would happen around, there'll be the negotiations around whether we would offer it for sale with or without covenants. So that's the paper in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Nick. Questions, Kate?
To balance this, Nick, and look, you've done exactly what we've asked, so I'm not being critical. But this is 50 hectares of land that could be planted out as a native carbon forest, and even add to those values, the biodiversity values. We're a biodiversity and environmental organisation. We've got community groups working in the area that love doing this sort of thing. It's right on the boundary of DOC land where it's a forest park. It's got access issues, so we'll never sell it for a lot. Can I just understand how much work would it be to consider the value as a carbon? I mean, we've just done 2 reports for saying we want to be carbon free and everything. To consider this as a native carbon forest for us, and would there be a lot of work to do that? You know, we know that the returns are pretty high on this stuff as an offset.
Yeah, I don't know is the simple answer. If we'd have to go away and do some work and analyse that and come back to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, I'm just going to, I've got Brian and then I'll come to you, Michael. Michael Laws.
Yeah, the next day that an ecological report has been done.
It's attached in the.
So, well, I apologize, I missed that. Sorry?
It's in the non-public section of the report. Yeah. So there's, yeah.
Am I in the public session about, is it appropriate, inappropriate to ask what the ecological vote conclusion was?
You should have read that and kept that in your mind.
Yeah, well, but isn't it pertinent to the public debate?
So it comes back to the terms and conditions of the terms of the sale.
Yeah.
So we've got to first get over the, whether we going to sell this block of land or not, yes or no. Then we have that discussion, and it needs to be obviously in non-public, simply because it's confidential, because it relates to.
Doesn't it relate to whether we want to sell it as well? I mean, if I thought it had great ecological values, personally, I'd keep it.
But remember when we asked for this report,
Yeah.
when we discussed it 12 months ago, or whenever it was, last year, the conversation was around what ecological value existed in this block.
Yeah.
So hence we requested staff to go away,
Yeah.
get a suitably qualified person to go and do an ecological study. We've now got that information. We've also got valuation information as well, which we can't discuss in the public arena, but we've had that available for us to read, consume and analyse, whatever.
Fair enough.
Michael Laws.
I mean, this is one of the reasons you have council meetings at the end of the day, is that a councillor comes up with an idea that you haven't thought of, and it isn't in the written papers that you receive. I quite like Councillor Wilson's idea of knowing what it would be if we planted it out, and the carbon credits that would be available to us under the exchange scheme. And I've just looked through very quickly the matters that are in the public excluded session, the ecological report, the valuation. Neither of those seem to cover that issue. I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to do that. I don't like giving away 50 hectares that belong to the ratepayer, or that we've even got, without knowing what an alternative economic value might be should we undertake something. And I was just wondering, Andrew as chair and Pim as chief executive, if that wouldn't be a bad piece just to inquire into before we make a final decision, because we won't have that information in the public excluded session either.
Yeah. Looking at the ecological report, and we've obviously all looked at it. The land is, it's quite obvious what it looks like. So all I'm saying is that it's not open pasture, probably what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I suppose I'm not trying to delve into it, but all I'm saying, you've obviously got vegetation there that is doing essentially what you're suggesting, Kate, anyway. But I understand where you're coming from in terms of the value of the land, etc. But if we want to delve into that, what I suggest we do is that we adjourn the public meeting and then go into non-public, have that conversation, and then release whatever we need to release at a later date, by way of, if there was any parts of.
Do you want us to lay it on the table at present?
Well, if you want to delve into more detail around the information that's been supplied by experts that will impact on the terms and conditions of a potential sale, I think we need to go into non-public.
So, yeah, so I meant for the public part, do you want this particular paper, which is in the public part, to lay on the table at present? Then you get back to answer it.
Yeah, no,
And if that's an easier way through, that's all.
Okay, that's probably an easy way. If you
I'm happy to move that.
Okay, second up. Ryan, so this is lying on the table. So then we will adjourn the public meeting and we'll go into non-public. That's what you're suggesting.
After, yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And then you can come back if you want to.
Michael Deaker, do you want to speak to that motion?
You don't, it's procedural.
Yeah, I was going to suggest something very similar. I like Kate's thinking. It would be a desktop exercise for this parcel of land, for a suitable consultant to come back to us very quickly with the costs and benefits of native planting for carbon savings. Yeah, so I think I do support the motion that's on the table now, which is to put this to one side and go into the ecological report, keeping in mind that we may have to do some more work. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Michael. And Kate's just reminded me it's a notice. The notice of motion is a procedural motion, and there should be no discussion. So I'll put the vote. Those in favour of us lying the item on the table, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, so in a moment, well, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have a 10-minute break.
Your reports, your reports.
Take a break.
No, let's-
We do need a break. We're going for 2.5.
Yeah, so I think if we have I don't know, a 10-minute break, grab a cup of tea, coffee, whatever, and then we'll come back into it, finish off the public section, and then hop in and deal with the non-public.
All right.
Is that okay?
Fine.
Why do we stand adjourned? with the non-public stuff. Okay. And then depending on the outcome of the away stuff, whether we need to go back into.
Oh, I thought we'd already done that, but yeah, right. But
we're good to go. Yep. Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. So just a reminder, we're on item 8 on the council agenda, the public part of the meeting, and we'll deal with items 8, 9, and 10, and then adjourn the public part of the meeting, and then go to the non-public, deal with those items, and then depending on the outcome of the Kurawau discussion, whether we need to go back into public to ratify that paper or not. We'll play that one by ear. So anyway, recommendations adopted by committee meetings, recommendations of the regulatory committee. You happy to move, Gary? I will move.
Second.
Second by Kate. Is there any discussion?
Sorry, technology problems.
No, all good. So you're seconding that, yeah, Gary?
Yep. Happy to.
Okay. Sorry, Kate. I'll move.
No, but you know that.
Gary seconded. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Recommendations of the Otago Southern Regional Transport Committee. Alexa's, is she with us? Maybe. Can you move, Alexa?
Yep, I am, and I am with you, just having a slight hitch there.
All good. Seconded by Kate. Is there any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Recommendations of the Strategy and Planning Committee, moved by Kate, seconded by Gretchen. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, Chairperson and Chief Executive's report. Take it as read. There's just one relatively minor change. The third bullet point in my report talks about the Otago Civil Defence Emergency Management. What's actually the partnership agreement that's been signed by all Otago's territorial authorities. I've been informed that the DCC hasn't signed, but all the others have. So that's just that correction that should be noted. But happy to take questions, and then we'll move to the interim chief executive's report. Are there any questions? Brian.
Excuse me, I'd just like to make the comment and acknowledge, be remiss if I didn't, Professor Skelton's report that you've included in there. And in particular, they cover the final 3 paragraphs. So I won't go any further, but it's a significant report. You could acknowledge that. One in relation to timeframes and another in relation to behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Alexa?
Just a quick comment is I actually wrote a report from the local government conference, but I don't think I sent it to you to include. Maybe I will just, or did I send it to you to include? I can't remember.
I haven't seen it, but how about we pick it up for either the 15th or the 28th?
Great. I'll do that. Sorry about that. My bad. I wrote it, I posted it on my blog, and I think I forgot to send it to you. But it'll get there.
Either of those council meetings can pick it up, I'm sure.
Great, thanks.
No other queries. Someone like to move the reports noted? Kevin, second by Kate. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. 9.2, interim chief executive's report, take it as read. Any questions of Pim or comment? Everyone comfortable? Or put, is anything you want to do?
No, just as read.
Take it as read. Yep.
Move.
Kate, I have to move Kate. Second, Kevin. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now, instead of going to item 10, we will adjourn the public part of this. We'll adjourn this council meeting, this public council meeting, and then we'll move into non-public. And as I alluded to before, we'll deal with the non-public, and then we'll decide whether we need to come back into public or not, which depends on the outcome of the Kurawau discussion. So I'll move that we adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, what about the Chief Executive's report?
Yes, we'll deal with those, all the non-public items, Michael.
We just moved them past it. It was a bit slow.
Oh, yeah. No. So moved, it was seconded by Kevin.
Yeah.
Motion was in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. So we'll just wait for a moment for